Imagine trying to read a single book that was written by, you know, dozens of different people.
Right.
And over the course of roughly 1,500 years, in three completely different ancient languages.
It's honestly a logistical nightmare if you think about it.
Exactly. And imagine that this book had survived the total collapse of empires, massive translation wars, and just centuries of hand copying before it ever reached you.
Yeah, before you could just, buy it at a bookstore.
Right. But that is exactly what you are doing when you open the Bible. It completely shatters our modern expectation of what a book is actually supposed to be.
It really does. Because usually when you sit down to read, you expect order, right?
Yeah, chapter 1, a clear protagonist, a linear plot.
And a nice, neat resolution by the end. You get the comfort of a single authorial voice guiding you through this highly curated experience.
Which is definitely not what this is.
No, not at all. The Bible offers none of that. It is, the absolute definition of textual and historical muddy waters.
Which is exactly why we are here today. So, welcome to a custom-tailored deep dive, crafted specifically for you, the listener.
We're glad you're here.
Whether you are insanely curious about ancient history or, prepping for a deep theological conversation, or just trying to understand the fundamental cultural bedrock of Western civilization.
Which it absolutely is.
Approaching the Bible can honestly feel like trying to drink from a fire hose. So our mission today is twofold. First, we're going to demystify what this text actually is, historically and structurally.
Right.
And second, we're going to explore exactly how it is consumed and experienced by millions of people today.
And to do this, we are grounding our analysis in two very different but highly complementary sources.
Yeah. What are we looking at today?
So the first is a comprehensive encyclopedic history of the Bible's origins. It covers everything from ancient manuscript transmission to the really intense centuries-long canonization process.
The Canon Wars.
Exactly. And the second source is this fascinating book, A Beginner's Guide to Reading the Bible by Elmer Towns.
Which is great because it really shifts the perspective.
It does. It gives us an inside look at the phenomenology of reading, meaning the actual lived experience of how believers interact with this text spiritually, emotionally, and practically.
And just to set the tone right out of the gate for you guys, we're taking an intellectual adventure today. We are not here to take a religious stance.
No, not at all.
Nor are we endorsing the theological claims within the texts.
Right, we're looking at this objectively.
Exactly. Instead, we are impartially exploring the fascinating, messy history of these documents and the deeply specific practices outlined in our sources. Okay, let's unpack this. If you hold a Bible in your hands today, you're actually holding an ancient Mediterranean trade route.
I love that. That's a great way to frame it, actually, starting with the word itself.
The word Bible.
Yeah. The English word Bible comes from the Koine Greek phrase, ta biblia, which translates simply to the books, plural.
Oh, plural. Interesting.
And that word biblia derives from biblos.
Which was the ancient Phoenician seaport that exported Egyptian papyrus.
Wow,
right?
You got it. So the very name of the book points directly back to the physical material it was written on.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that plural name, the books, is the most crucial thing for you, the listener, to keep in mind.
Because if you try to read this front to back, expecting a novel, you will be hopelessly confused.
Hopelessly.
It's an anthology. It's honestly like hitting shuffle on a playlist that spans 1,500 years of musical genres.
That's the perfect analogy.
Because you've got ancient nomadic campfire songs playing right next to rigid bureaucratic legal codes from a settled monarchy.
Right.
And then that's followed by, apocalyptic poetry written under the boot of Roman occupation.
And to make sense of that shuffled playlist, you really have to look at how it's structured, starting with the foundational text, which is the Hebrew Bible.
The Tanakh.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In Jewish tradition, this is known as the Tanakh. And that word is actually an acronym.
Oh, I didn't realize that. What does it stand for?
It stands for its three major divisions. So you have the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim.
Okay, let's actually look at what those are. So the Torah, which is often translated as teaching, or the Pentateuch, meaning the 5 books, that contains Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Right, the foundational narratives.
Yeah, it covers the story from the creation of the world all the way to the death of Moses. But it's not just a story, is it?
No, not at all. It contains 613 specific commandments.
Wow.
Yeah, they're known as the Tariq Mitzvot. And we aren't just talking about, thou shalt not steal.
Right, it gets super specific.
Extremely. We're talking about hyper-specific legal codes for an ancient agrarian society, like how to plant crops, how to handle mildew in your stone house.
Mildew?
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Huh?
Or how to resolve property disputes over a stray ox. It covers everything.
Okay, so that's the Torah. What's the next part?
From there, the timeline progresses into the Nevi'im, which means the prophets. And this section is further divided.
Okay, into what? Well, the former prophets read a lot more like a historical narrative, so you have books like Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings.
Okay, the history books.
Exactly. They detail the bloody rise of the Hebrew monarchy, its eventual civil war, division, and fall.
So what are the latter prophets then?
So when modern people hear prophet, they often think of like a fortune teller with a crystal ball, right?
Yeah, someone predicting the future.
But in this context, these were visionary social critics. They were holding kings accountable, criticizing unethical wealth hoarding, and really urging social justice.
That's a very different vibe.
It is, and this includes massive works by Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, along with the 12 minor prophets. And minor just means shorter in length, not less important.
Right, books like Hosea, Amos, and Jonah.
Exactly.
And finally, the K in Tanakh stands for Ketuvim, or the writings,
Yeah, and this is where the anthology shifts into highly poetic and philosophical territory.
like the Psalms.
Yes. You have the Sifrei Emet, which are Psalms, Proverbs, and Job. And our encyclopedic source notes something really fascinating here.
What's that?
In the authoritative medieval manuscripts, these three books actually have a special two-column poetic form,
Oh, physically on the page.
physically on the page. They are visually distinct, signaling to the reader that they are entering a completely different mode of thought.
That is so cool.
The Ketuvim also houses the 5 Megillot, or scrolls, and those include deeply personal texts like the Song of Songs and Ruth.
And then it wraps up with history again, right?
Yeah, historical books like Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles, and if you look at the original language of those final historical books, you can literally see the passage of time.
How so? Like the vocabulary changes.
Exactly. They share a distinct post-exilic literary style. They were written much later after the Babylonian captivity.
I see.
And you can see the linguistic shift, including significant portions that are just written in Aramaic instead of Biblical Hebrew.
Wow. And for Christian listeners, or anyone familiar with the Western canon, you then have the Christian New Testament basically appended onto the back of that library.
Right.
That's a collection of 27 books written in Koine Greek, which was the common trade language of the Roman Empire at the time.
Yeah, the everyday language.
You have the 4 Gospels detailing the life of Jesus,
Ah.
the Book of Acts documenting the spread of the early church, 13 letters attributed to a former Pharisee named Paul.
Written to various young underground churches, yeah.
Right. And then 8 general letters by other authors. And finally, the hallucinatory apocalyptic Book of Revelation.
When you lay all of that out, you realize how this structure forces the reader to engage with the text. What's fascinating here is, according to Jewish philosophers Shalom Karmi and David Schatz, whom our sources reference, the Bible constantly juxtaposes completely contradictory ideas.
And without any explanation or apology, right?
Bro apology.
It's basically a library that openly argues with itself.
It truly is. I mean, you have the rigid, divine, black and white laws of the Torah sitting in the exact same library as the deeply cynical, questioning, gray area philosophy of Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, Ecclesiastes is incredibly existentially bleak.
It is. It doesn't offer a clean, systematized philosophy that tells you exactly what to think. It presents the tension of human existence across vastly different ecological realities.
Right, from nomadic wandering in a desert to the heights of a wealthy empire to the absolute despair of exile.
And it leaves the reader to infer the moral direction.
But thinking about that 1,500-year timeline brings up a massive logistical hurdle.
Oh, definitely.
If we have texts written across a millennium and a half, spanning nomadic tents to Roman prisons, how on earth did these specific words survive without turning into just historical static?
Well, to understand that survival, we have to look at the physical mechanics of transmission. And we have to start before the text was even written down.
Oh, the oral tradition phase.
Right. The oldest parts of this library began as oral tradition.
I think our modern minds often hear oral tradition, and we immediately think unreliable.
We do. We picture the telephone game.
Exactly. We picture someone vaguely remembering a story their grandfather told them at a bar. But ancient orality wasn't casual storytelling, was it?
Not at all. It was highly structured communal performance.
Yeah.
In a pre-literate society, memory is a muscle that is trained rigorously.
Like an athlete.
Yeah. The community acted as the quality control. If a storyteller changed a genealogy or missed a verse of a communal song, the audience would immediately correct them. It was a shared ledger of history.
But eventually they had to write it down.
They did.
Our sources note the earliest biblical manuscripts were written in Paleo-Hebrew, which looks almost like cuneiform pictographs.
Very jagged ancient script.
Right. But then a massive trauma happens. The Babylonian exile. And we throw that phrase around in history classes, but we have to ground what that actually meant.
It was catastrophic.
The Israelites' capital was sieged, their temple was completely leveled, and their intellectual class was dragged away to a foreign empire. When your entire culture is facing erasure, suddenly writing down your oral history becomes a matter of existential survival.
That exile triggered a massive cultural shift. They adopted the Aramaic square script from their captors.
Which is much closer to the Hebrew letters used today, right?
Yes, exactly. But even with a standardized script, you still face the problem of copying. For centuries, every single copy was made by hand.
Just writing it out line by line.
Yeah, and reading the process described in Towns's book, it was intensely physical, messy labor. Scribes were mixing soot from fireplaces with olive oil to create ink.
Wow, soot and olive oil.
Yeah, and they used feather quills, carefully pulling the ink into the barrel of the feather. They wrote on coarse animal skins, heavily processed calf skin called vellum, or papyrus reeds harvested from the Nile.
I have to push back on this, though.
Okay, go ahead.
If humans are copying texts by hand, mixing soot and olive oil, line by line, over hundreds and hundreds of years, isn't this just a massive historical game of telephone?
There's that telephone analogy again.
Right. You whisper a sentence to me, I whisper to the next person, and 1,000 years later, God created the heavens, turns into Todd created the ravens.
That's hilarious, but yeah, it's a valid question.
How could anyone trust a hand-copied text over that much time?
The telephone game analogy is definitely the most common critique of ancient transmission, but it fundamentally misunderstands how these scribes operated.
How so?
Well, the game of telephone relies on a secret, single-chain, unchecked transmission. You whisper in my ear and no one else hears it.
Right, the whole point of the game is the lack of verification.
Exactly. Biblical transmission was the exact opposite. It was more like an ancient blockchain.
Oh, I like that. An ancient blockchain.
Yeah. Every single new copy had to be verified against a strict mathematical ledger before it was accepted into the network.
Okay, walk us through how that actually worked.
As the texts were copied over centuries, a specific group of highly specialized scholars emerged who took this responsibility to an unprecedented extreme.
Who were they?
They were called the Masoretes, operating between the 6th and 10th centuries CE, primarily in Tiberias and Babylonia. And the Masoretes didn't just copy the text, they mathematically codified it.
Wait, mathematically, what does that mean?
Well, first they added vowel signs to the consonant-only Hebrew to permanently lock in the pronunciation. But more importantly, they created rigid quality control formulas. A scribe would literally count the number of words and letters in a book.
Are you serious? Every single letter.
Every single letter. They knew exactly which letter was the dead center of a specific scroll. If a newly copied scroll was finished, they would count to the middle. If the middle letter didn't match the master mathematical formula, the entire scroll was considered corrupted and was destroyed.
They didn't just cross it out and write the right letter in the margin. They destroyed the whole thing.
The whole thing. It had to be perfect.
That is mind-boggling dedication. And it resulted in what we now call the authoritative Masoretic text, right?
Yes. With the Leningrad Codex from around 1000 CE being the oldest complete copy still in existence.
But let's be intellectually honest here. It wasn't 100% flawless. Humans still make mistakes.
Oh, of course they do. And the sources note that there are textual variants, deviations between manuscripts.
Right.
However, roughly 90% of the Hebrew text is entirely without variation.
That is incredibly high.
It is, and the variants that do exist are mostly accidental. You have spelling errors or memory variants.
That's a memory variant.
It's where a scribe accidentally shifted word order because they knew a passage so well from memory that their brain skipped ahead of their quill.
Oh, like when you're typing something you've said a million times and you just skip a word.
Exactly, just a human brain glitch.
We also see intentional variants pop up, though, especially when we cross over into the early Christian era.
Yes, that's a different landscape.
Because the Christian copyists who were rapidly spreading the New Testament letters weren't always professionally trained mathematical scribes like the Masoretes.
No, they were often just literate members of a persecuted underground movement trying to quickly copy a letter from Paul before moving to the next city.
Running for their lives, basically.
Yeah. And this led to different localized text types, families of texts with minor theological or grammatical shifts, like the Alexandrian, Western Caesarean, and Byzantine families.
But the remarkable thing is that we can actually check the homework of all these ancient scribes thanks to two massive historical developments.
Yes, these are huge.
The first was the Septuagint. This was a translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Koine Greek, created in Alexandria, Egypt, around the 3rd to 2nd centuries BCE.
And tradition says it was translated by 70 or 72 scribes, right?
Yeah, for Hellenic Jews who had grown up in the Greek Empire and could no longer read Hebrew. The Septuagint, which is often referred to by the Roman numerals LXX, gives scholars a crucial historical anchor to see what the text looked like hundreds of years before the Masoretes.
It's a massive point of reference.
But the ultimate check on their homework, honestly, one of the greatest archaeological thrillers in history, happened in 1947.
This is such a great story.
A young Bedouin shepherd boy in Qumran, near the Dead Sea, was looking for a lost sheep. He tossed a dirt clod into a cave, expecting to hear it hit the rock wall and scare the sheep out.
But that's not what he heard.
No. Instead, he heard the unmistakable clunk of breaking pottery. And inside those ancient clay jars were scrolls of the Hebrew Bible dating all the way back to 200 BCE.
The Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes.
They predated the Leningrad Codex by over 1,000 years. It was an unprecedented opportunity to test the ancient blockchain.
And when scholars finally laid these ancient Dead Sea Scrolls next to the Masoretic text copied a millennium later, the accuracy was staggering.
It really was.
The Masoretic text was largely confirmed. It proved that their obsessive mathematical counting of letters wasn't just folklore. It was a highly effective method of high-fidelity data preservation over centuries.
Though, to add a layer of complexity, the Dead Sea Scrolls also showed some fascinating alignments with the Greek Septuagint version.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which proved that ancient texts had a slight degree of fluidity before they were mathematically locked down.
And that fluidity brings us to the next massive hurdle. The scribes were incredibly dedicated to preserving the words. But who got to decide which words and which books made the final cut?
Ah, the boundary lines.
This introduces the canon wars and the concept of an expanding and shrinking library.
Canon is a word you probably hear tossed around in pop culture today, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. It sounds like a boardroom negotiation for a movie franchise. You know, a bunch of studio executives deciding which comic books are official canon for the cinematic universe and which are just fan fiction.
Right. But historically, establishing a biblical canon was an intense matter of identity and survival. Canon simply means an official, authoritative collection of scriptures.
Okay.
And what's vital for you to understand is that different religious communities drew the boundaries of this library very differently.
How so?
Well, Judaism eventually established a single authoritative text, the Tanakh we discussed earlier. But Christianity, as it spread across different continents, evolved with varying canons depending on the geographic and theological traditions of local churches.
Yeah, if you grew up in an American Protestant church, you might be used to seeing a crisp, leather-bound Bible with exactly 66 books.
Yeah.
But if you look globally, the numbers are wildly different.
Right.
The Catholic Bible authorized 73 books at the Council of Trent in the 1500s.
A bit larger.
And the Eastern and Oriental Orthodox churches accept 76 books. And if you are an Ethiopian Orthodox listener, your Bible holds an incredible 81-book canon.
And those numeric differences largely come down to a collection of texts known as the Apocrypha, which means hidden or obscure books, and another group called the Pseudepigrapha.
I want to pause on pseudepigrapha because that is a massive seminary-level word.
It is a mouthful.
Let's break that down for those of us without theology degrees. Pseudo meaning false. Epigrapha meaning inscription or writing. We're talking about fake attribution, right?
Precisely. It refers to works with wrongly attributed authorship.
Like forgeries.
Well, not always malicious forgeries. In the ancient world, it wasn't uncommon for a writer to pen a text and attribute it to a famous historical figure like Enoch or Moses or Paul to lend the text immediate authority.
Oh, I see.
It was an accepted literary convention sometimes, a way of saying this text honors the spirit of Moses, but it heavily complicated the canonization process.
Give me an example.
Well, our sources mention the Gospel of Barnabas, which claims to be written by Paul's companion, but manuscript evidence dates it much later to the Middle Ages.
So the early church leaders had to sift through these texts and figure out what was authentic and what was pseudo-history.
Exactly.
And some of these disputed texts are wildly fascinating. You have the Book of Enoch, which is an ancient apocalyptic text full of fallen angels and cosmic visions.
It's a wild read.
It really is. It was largely lost to Western Christianity, but survived in the Ge'ez language and is fully accepted as canon in Ethiopia. Fragments of it were even found among the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Which is incredible.
Then you have historical texts like 3 and 4 Maccabees, or extra poetic texts like Psalm 151.
You also see additions to existing books?
Like director's cuts.
Sort of.
Yeah.
The Book of Daniel, for instance, has 3 major editions translated into Greek by a scholar named Theodotion.
What were they?
The Prayer of Azariah, Susanna and the Elders, and Bel and the Dragon. And Theodotion's version actually superseded the older Septuagint version in early Christian usage because it was closer to the surviving Hebrew text, but it included these dramatic extra narratives.
But looking at all these variations, a listener might wonder, why were the rabbis and the early church fathers making these cuts at all?
That's a fair question.
Why draw a hard line and say these 66 books are in and those books are out? Why not just keep the library open?
This raises an important question about the context they were living in. It comes back to the existential threat we mentioned earlier, persecution.
Right.
Both Judaism and early Christianity were enduring periods of severe violent suppression from the Babylonians, the Greeks, and eventually the Roman Empire.
They were hunted.
Exactly. During an era of persecution, when Roman soldiers might raid your home, burn your texts, and execute your leaders, you need to know exactly which books are worth dying to protect.
Wow. Put it that way, it makes total sense. You aren't going to risk execution for a piece of historical fan fiction.
Absolutely not. Furthermore, the rabbis wanted to clearly distinguish their emerging post-temple tradition from the rapidly growing Christian movement. Establishing absolute authoritative baselines was a survival mechanism for both communities.
And right in the middle of these canon wars, a massive technological shift happens that completely changes how humans interact with information.
A huge paradigm shift.
We move from the scroll to the codex.
The Codex is essentially the forerunner of the modern bound book. Instead of unrolling a massive, continuous sheet of papyrus or animal skin, early Christians popularized the practice of folding a single sheet of papyrus in half to form pages and binding them together at the spine.
And if you think about why they did this, the mechanics completely explain the shift. A scroll is heavy.
Very heavy.
It requires 2 hands. You have to physically unroll the past to get to the future. It's meant to be placed on a podium and read continuously out loud by an educated priest to a listening community.
Right, it's very formal.
But early Christians were a marginalized underground traveling movement. They couldn't lug massive scrolls around Roman roads. A codex could be hidden in a cloak. It was highly portable.
And you could navigate it differently.
Exactly. You could hold it in one hand and instantly flip back and forth between an Old Testament prophecy and a New Testament letter to make a theological argument. It was built for cross-referencing. Holding a codex in one hand completely shifted the power dynamic.
It democratized the text, in a way.
It meant you didn't just have to listen to a priest read a scroll. You could privately, physically interact with the text yourself.
And that private, physical interaction is the perfect bridge to the second half of our deep dive.
Let's get into it.
We've mapped out the ancient trade routes, the transmission, the ancient blockchain, and the boundary lines of this library. But how does a modern person actually sit down and read a monumental ancient codex like this?
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is where we bring in our second source, Elmer Towns, a beginner's guide to reading the Bible.
A very different kind of source.
Towns provides a fascinating look into what academics call the phenomenology of reading from a believer's perspective.
And for anyone unfamiliar with that term, phenomenology just means the study of how we consciously experience things.
Right. Not just analyzing the text, but analyzing what happens in your mind and body when you read the text. Towns draws a hard line between reading analytically and reading devotionally.
How does he define the difference?
He argues that if you read the Bible at a superficial or purely analytical level, you will only get analytical results. You'll find historical dates, you'll track linguistic patterns, you'll debate geography. But he argues that if a believer reads it seeking to find God, they experience spiritual results.
Towns is really advocating for a deeply immersive experience here. He outlines an approach that engages all 5 physical senses to anchor the reader in the text.
I love this part of the source material because he's not talking about academic skimming. He is talking about immersive virtual reality reading without the headset.
That's a great way to put it.
Let's walk through his 5 senses approach first. Hearing, or the ears. He suggests reading the text out loud. Why? because when you just scan words silently on a page, your mind inevitably shifts into neutral.
Oh, absolutely. You start daydreaming.
You start thinking about your grocery list or an email you have to send while your eyes blindly track the words.
Yeah.
Reading aloud forces physical, muscular engagement. You hear your own voice wrestling with the words.
Second is the mouth, or taste. He uses a highly evocative metaphor of eating the words.
Eating them.
Yeah, he references the ancient prophet Jeremiah, who literally wrote, "Your words were found and I ate them." Towns compares the anticipation of reading scripture to the physical craving you get when you smell hamburgers and onions frying on a grill.
Okay, now I'm hungry.
Right. It's meant to be a visceral biological hunger for the text.
Which leads right into the third sense. Smell. He asks the reader to actually pause and imagine the aromas within the text.
Like what?
Well, if you're reading about Jesus calling himself the bread of life, close your eyes and imagine the smell of fresh biscuits coming out of a warm oven.
Oh, I like that.
Or, if you read the ancient love poetry in the Song of Solomon, imagine the sweet scent of the rose of Sharon. If you're reading Psalm 23, don't just abstractly read the words green pastures.
Yeah.
Smell the damp earth, the crushed grass, and the musky, dirty scent of the sheep.
And fourth is touch. He advises readers to feel the environmental reality of the narratives.
Like the weather.
Exactly. When you were reading about Abraham wandering in the desert, try to mentally simulate the oppressive, blinding 100-degree heat. Feel the grit of the sand. By physically empathizing with the harsh environment, you emotionally connect with the character's physical exhaustion and spiritual desperation.
And finally, the eyes. Obviously, you use your eyes to read the ink on the page, but Townes frames the text as a two-way window.
A two-way window.
Yeah. You look into the text to see ancient history, but he claims the text also acts as a window looking back into your own soul, exposing your own flaws, and ultimately a window offering a glimpse into heaven.
You know, if we look at this through the lens of human psychology, what Townes is describing is an incredibly effective cognitive mnemonic device.
Really, like a memory trick.
Yes. Engaging the physical imagination and attaching sensory details to abstract information drastically increases retention. It moves the information out of the frontal lobe's cold analytical processing and pushes it deep into the limbic system.
Wiring it directly to emotion.
Exactly. Wiring it directly to emotion and long-term memory. So it's not just a spiritual exercise. It's a profound, scientifically backed psychological tool for internalizing a complex text.
Townes also introduces what he calls the Berean method.
Yeah.
He pulls this from an account in the book of Acts, where people from a town called Berea intensely studied the scriptures to verify if what they were being taught was actually true.
Right, they were skeptical but diligent.
Yes, and Townes points out that the Greek root word used to describe their style of study is the exact same word used for a woman in a kitchen sifting flour.
Sifting flour.
Yeah, you don't just dump a bag of raw flour into a bowl. You sift every single microscopic particle to ensure there are no clumps, no impurities, no mistakes. That's how he suggests reading the Bible, sifting every single particle of the text, slowing down enough to examine every word.
And he synthesizes this approach into the 5 fingers of grasping the Bible.
5 fingers, like a hand grip.
Exactly. A hand needs all 5 fingers to form a strong grip on an object. In his model, the fingers are hearing the word, reading the word, studying it deeply, memorizing it, and meditating on it.
And there's some fantastic anecdotes in the source material highlighting the friction between slow, immersive reading and fast academic posturing.
Oh, the D.L. Moody story.
Yes. There's the story of the famous 19th century evangelist D.L. Moody talking to a wealthy, highly educated student named R.A. Torrey. Torrey's complaining that he's been listening to a seminary professor lecture for 6 months, and they still haven't figured out definitively who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible.
And what does Moody say?
Moody just looks at him and tells him to stop agonizing over the endless academic debates, read the book himself, and master its contents.
And then there is the brilliant interaction involving the English Bible teacher G. Campbell Morgan.
Oh, this one is great.
Morgan once casually claimed that a person could read the entire Bible at pulpit rate, meaning reading it aloud clearly and deliberately in 60 hours. A wealthy banker challenged him, went home, read furiously, and came back claiming he had read it in 40 hours.
Eating the time.
Right. But Morgan just stroked his beard and replied, "I said pulpit rate. You can't trust a banker's rate."
That is such a polite, devastating Victorian burn. You can't trust a banker's rate.
He really is.
He's basically saying, you rushed it to win a bet, which means you absorbed absolutely nothing. It highlights that speed is the ultimate enemy of the sifting flour method. You have to slow down.
You really do.
But if you are immersively engaging with the text, smelling the sheep and feeling the desert heat, what parts of the library offer the best material for this?
Well, for that kind of reading, the narrative genres are unparalleled. The Bible is uniquely populated with humanity. I mean, there are over 3,500 individually named characters in the text.
Counts suggests reading the Bible almost like an ancient edition of People magazine.
People magazine. That's a wild comparison.
It is, but he doesn't mean that in a trivial way. He means you should look for the life message of both the major historical heavy hitters and the minor, unnamed background characters. Every single person acts as a complex case study in human nature.
That makes a lot of sense.
You have Enoch, who has barely any text written about him, but is noted for just quietly walking with God. You have the unnamed little boy who gives up his meager lunch of fish and loaves, resulting in a miracle.
Yeah.
You have the bashful, bleeding woman who risks public shaming just to touch the edge of Jesus' cloak.
Paying attention to names is a crucial sub-strategy for reading these narratives. In the ancient Near East, names were not just random phonetic tags you put on a birth certificate.
They weren't.
No, they were destinies. They defined a person's character, and when a person's destiny changed dramatically, their name was changed by God.
Like Abram and Abraham.
Exactly. Abram, which meant high father, becomes Abraham, father of many nations, after God establishes a sprawling covenant with him.
Or Jacob.
Yes, Jacob, which literally translates to deceiver or heel catcher, because he was born grasping his twin brother's heel and spent his life conning people, is renamed Israel, meaning prince with God or wrestles with God, after a literal night of grueling spiritual and physical struggle.
And then you have the fascinating tragic backstory of the sons of Korah. I loved this hidden detail from the text.
It's so easily overlooked.
If you read the songs, you'll see several of them, like the incredibly beautiful Psalm 84 are attributed to the sons of Korah. But who on earth was Korah?
You have to do some digging to find that out.
Right. If you cross-reference back to the book of Numbers, Korah was a Levite who became violently jealous of Moses' leadership in the desert. He led a massive rebellion, and according to the text, the earth literally opened up and swallowed him and his followers in an earthquake.
But the text notes that his children were spared.
Exactly. And imagine the psychological weight of that. Out of the deep shame and trauma of their father's arrogant rebellion, the sons of Korah chose a lifestyle of extreme, intentional humility. They became lowly doorkeepers in the temple.
Wow.
When they wrote some of the most soaring, transcendent poetry in the entire Bible, they refused to put their individual names on it out of meekness. They just signed it collectively. The sons of Korah, a constant reminder of their family's failure and God's mercy.
That is deeply moving.
Knowing that trauma completely changes how you read Psalm 84, where they write, "I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness."
It adds an incredibly poignant layer of historical trauma and redemption to a piece of poetry. Aside from historical characters, the other major narrative vehicle in the text is the parable.
Jesus was famous for using parables.
He was a master of them.
The word itself comes from the Greek parabole, which means to place one thing beside another. It's an earthly story designed to carry a heavenly meaning. It's a brilliant rhetorical device because it completely bypasses our intellectual defenses.
That is the psychological genius of the parable.
Yeah.
When you argue doctrine or theology directly with someone, their ideological shields go up
You're
immediately.
not going to stop listening.
They start preparing their counter-argument while you are still speaking. But when you say, "Let me tell you a story," people lean in. They lower their defenses to follow the narrative arc, and the moral application slips right past the guard before they realize they've been indicted.
The classic example in the text is the Good Samaritan. A legal expert tries to trap Jesus in a theological debate by asking a highly technical question, "Who is my neighbor?"
He's looking for a loophole.
He wants Jesus to draw a boundary line, indicating who he is not obligated to help. Jesus doesn't quote a legal statute. He tells a story. He sets it on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. And we have to pause here because an ancient listener would instantly tense up hearing that location.
Oh, absolutely. The road to Jericho was a steep, treacherous, winding descent through rocky canyons. It was historically infamous for violent bandits. It was the ancient equivalent of walking down a dark, dangerous alleyway at 3 a.m.
In the story, a man traveling that road is beaten, robbed, and left for dead. A priest and a Levite, the religious elite, the supposed good guys of the society, both see the bleeding man, but they pass by on the other side of the road.
likely to maintain their strict ritual purity since touching a corpse would disqualify them from temple service.
Then a Samaritan arrives. We have to understand the ethnic tension here. To a first-century Jewish audience, the Samaritans were a despised, heretical ethnic group. There was hundreds of years of bad blood.
Extreme prejudice.
But the Samaritan is the one who stops. He bandages the wounds with oil and wine, puts the victim on his own donkey, walks alongside him, and pays an innkeeper out of his own pocket to nurse the man back to health.
And Jesus finishes the story and asks the lawyer, which of these three was a neighbor? He forces the lawyer to admit that the despised cultural outsider was the hero, and the religious insiders were the villains.
It's a devastatingly effective narrative trap. The lawyer asked for a legal boundary, and Jesus gave him an impossible standard of radical empathy.
But there is a major danger in reading parables, which Towne specifically points out. The danger is over-allegorizing.
Right. This is where people try to find a hidden mystical Da Vinci Code in every single physical detail of a simple story.
Exactly.
They'll read the Good Samaritan and say the innkeeper represents the institutional church, the 2 silver coins represent the Old and New Testaments, and the donkey represents the Holy Spirit.
It gets ridiculous.
Townes uses a brilliant analogy to shut this down. He says allegorizing every detail of a parable is like taking a baseball and trying to press it completely flat on a table so that every single part of the ball touches the surface at once.
You'd ruin the ball.
Right. If you do that, you rip the seams. It's no longer a ball. You've destroyed the object, trying to force it to do something it wasn't designed to do.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights the vital difference between understanding an ancient parabolic teaching and falling into modern literalism. A parable is a mirror, not a cipher.
A mirror, not a cipher. I like that.
It is designed to reflect a single, piercing moral truth about the listener. It is not designed to act as a secret code book where every noun has a hidden metaphysical equivalent.
So we've covered the complex history, the immersive reading techniques, the characters, and the parables. But stories like the Good Samaritans only take us so far. Eventually, people start trying to extract hard rules from these stories to govern their communities, which leads us to grapple with some incredibly messy, controversial material: doctrine, prophecy, and promises.
Doctrine is a word that often carries negative, stuffy connotations today.
Yeah, people hear doctrine and think of strict, boring rules.
Even D.L. Moody, who we mentioned earlier, warned that feeding strictly on doctrine is like trying to live on dry husks, because it lacks the vitality and humanity of the narrative. But Townes clarifies what doctrine actually is.
How does he define it?
It is simply the act of taking scattered biblical facts and synthesizing them into a consistent system. Moody later conceded that doctrine is the glue or the road. It is highly structured, yes, but a road is only valuable if it actually takes you somewhere.
And Townes begs his readers to use common sense when applying this synthesis. He points out a vital hermeneutical rule, and by hermeneutical we just mean the science of interpretation, how we derive meaning from a text.
Right, hermeneutics.
The rule is this: you must differentiate between what the Bible dictates and what it merely describes.
That is a critical distinction that prevents a lot of dangerous theology. Just because the text records an event does not mean the text endorses the event.
Exactly. The example he uses is Abraham. Abraham and his wife Sarah were aging and couldn't have children. Out of desperation to fulfill God's promise of an heir, Abraham has a child with Sarah's servant girl, Hagar.
A very messy human situation.
The Bible describes this event in great historical detail, including the immense jealousy, family fracture, and trauma it causes. But it is absolutely not dictating that believers should exploit their servants when facing infertility. Common sense has to intervene. You have to read the descriptive failure of the patriarchs as a cautionary tale, not a manual.
Which brings us to perhaps the most sensational, hijacking-prone, and misunderstood genre in the entire text: prophecy.
Oh, prophecy.
Over 1/3 of the Bible was prophetic when it was originally written.
And for Christians, the Old Testament is viewed as a massive, intricate, predictive roadmap pointing directly toward Jesus. They point to prophecies predicting a virgin birth, the specific small town of Bethlehem, a king riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, and even the exact price of betrayal being 30 pieces of silver. But interpreting prophecy outside of that historical context, especially apocalyptic prophecy, gets incredibly messy, incredibly fast.
The history of modern prophetic interpretation is littered with spectacular, embarrassing failures. People love to try and predict the identity of the Antichrist, an apocalyptic world ruler mentioned in the New Testament.
Yeah, that's a popular parlor game.
During World War II, many radio preachers confidently declared it was Benito Mussolini. In the 1970s, some claimed it was U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, allegedly because his diplomatic limousine license plate contained the number 666.
Are you kidding? Kissinger.
No, I'm serious. Some fringe groups even claimed it was John Lennon.
Or the famous TV preacher who published a booklet called 88 Reasons for the Rapture in 1988.
Oh, I heard of that one.
Spoiler alert, he was wrong. The year passed, and he had to publish 89 reasons for 1989. It just goes to show how tempting it is to take ancient, highly symbolic, apocalyptic imagery and map it onto current geopolitical headlines.
Take the book of Daniel, for instance. Daniel describes a terrifying, surreal vision of a massive statue. The head is made of pure gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, the legs of iron, and the feet a fragile, unstable mixture of iron and clay.
Okay.
Then a rock cut without human hands flies through the air, smashes the fragile feet, and the whole statue crumbles to dust, while the rock grows into a mountain that covers the earth.
It's an incredible piece of ancient cinematic imagery. Historically, it's interpreted as a timeline of the ancient empires that would conquer the region. Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, ultimately smashed by the eternal kingdom of God.
Right.
But people constantly try to update the iron and clay feat to mean whatever modern political alliance they currently dislike. They'll say, the iron and clay represents the European Union, or it represents the United Nations.
It never ends.
So what does this all mean? If you are a listener taking all this in, you have to wonder, if these prophecies are so consistently misunderstood, hijacked, and misapplied in real time, why on earth do believers bother reading them at all? Why not just stick to the Psalms and the Good Samaritan?
That is the core tension of reading apocalyptic literature. But the expert reader must look at the text's own internal framework to understand its purpose.
Does the text explain itself?
It does. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 29, verse 29, the text explicitly states, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God." Within its own theology, prophecy is not meant to be a crystal ball for predicting specific geopolitical events or calculating the dates of the end of the world.
Then what is it for?
According to the text itself, its primary purpose is to provide comfort to persecuted believers, to assure them that God is sovereign over the chaos of human history, and, in the Christian view, to point the reader's focus toward the character of Jesus, not to spark obsessive speculative paranoia over beasts and hailstones.
Which brings us to a perfect summarizing anecdote from Towns that captures the entire ethos of how a believer is supposed to interact with this ancient library. Remember that pastor who bragged to his denomination that he'd read the Bible 107 times, but he still ended up getting kicked out of his church for heresy and unethical behavior?
Yes, the man who read it constantly but was entirely unchanged by it.
Towns' conclusion to that story is essentially the ultimate thesis of his entire book. He says, the issue is not how many times you've been through the Bible, but how many times the Bible has been through you.
It perfectly encapsulates the profound difference between the analytical collection of data reading for speed, reading to win an argument, reading to predict the news, and the phenomenological experience of actively allowing yourself to be shaped by a text.
And what a text it is. We have covered a massive amount of historical and psychological ground today. We started at the ancient Phoenician seaports of Byblos, trading raw papyrus scrolls. We looked at the rigorous, obsessive, mathematical quality control of the medieval Masoretic scribes, counting every single letter to preserve the ancient blockchain of the Hebrew text.
We navigated the canon wars, watching early persecuted communities draw boundaries around 66, 73, or even 81 books to define their identity and decide what was worth dying for.
We explored the deeply psychological, sensory-driven approach to reading advocated by Elmer Towns, slowing down to sift the flour, smelling the text, tasting the words, and feeling the heat of the narratives.
And we grappled with the immense complexities of drawing moral and doctrinal lessons from a library filled with ancient parables, violent histories, and cryptic apocalyptic visions.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a brand new thought to mull over. Throughout our conversation today, we talked about major technological shifts.
Like the Codex.
Yes. We talked about the monumental shift from communal oral tradition to written scrolls during the trauma of the Babylonian exile. We talked about the massive shift from the heavy scroll to the portal codex, the bound book that allowed early Christians to hide the text in their cloaks and cross-reference pages, fundamentally changing how humans interact with information.
It reshaped their entire relationship with the text.
But today, you and I live in a completely new era. We live in the era of the smartphone Bible app.
Oh, wow. That's true.
You can carry all 81 possible books in your pocket. You can hit C-Trail plus F to instantly search and find a specific verse in milliseconds, completely bypassing the surrounding context.
You can jump right to it.
Exactly. You can have an algorithm text you a curated, out-of-context daily devotional without you ever having to manually open a page or sift a single particle of flour.
Which is incredibly convenient.
It is. So how does this frictionless digital medium fundamentally alter that immersive, slow, physically demanding style of meditation that both the ancient Masoretic scribes and modern guides like Elmer Towns advocate? Does infinite, instant accessibility diminish the sacred effort required to truly engage with the text?
That's a challenging thought.
When you read a text on a glowing piece of glass designed to distract you with notifications, does the screen act as a two-way window into your soul, or does it just act as a wall?
It is a profound question about the intersection of ancient demanding texts and modern convenience-driven technology. It asks whether the medium itself changes the message.
This is something to think about the next time you pull a physical book or a glowing app out of your pocket. Thank you so much for joining us on this custom deep dive.
Here.
Keep exploring your sources, keep asking the hard questions, and keep diving deep.